The sound of shattering crystal silenced the entire room. Everyone froze, the waiters, the guests, and most of all, Damian. Standing over her smirking with a glass of red wine, dripping down Damian's vintage cream silk gown, was Sasha, the 24-year-old personal assistant, who everyone knew was actually sleeping with Damian's husband. Sasha leaned in her voice, dripping with fake concern, but loud enough for the elite of Newport to hear, "Oh, honey, you really should be more careful. That dress looks affordable. I'm sure it stains easily." Damian didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply looked at her father-in-law, William Harrington, who was watching from the head of the table, with eyes like flint. Sasha thought she had just marked her territory. She had no idea that she had just insulted the landlord, because in less than an hour, the deed to the mansion would be placed on the table, and the name on it wouldn't be Harrington. The air in Newport, Rhode Island, carries a specific kind of chill in late October. It's not just the Atlantic breeze whipping off the ocean. It's the social freeze of old money tightening its ranks. The Harrington estate, a sprawling Gilded Age monstrosity of limestone and ivy, known locally as the Eyrie, stood at the edge of the cliffs, looking down on the crashing waves with judgment. Damian Harrington sat in the back of her town car, watching the iron gates loom closer. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. At 32, she possessed a quiet architectural beauty, sharp cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, and a posture forged by years of enduring the Harrington family's subtle cruelties. She was the outsider, the scholarship girl from Chicago, who had married Preston Harrington the Hoofddolf, the golden boy of a banking dynasty that was unbeknownst to the public, slowly crumbling from the inside out. "We're here, Mrs. Harrington," the driver, Thomas, said softly. He liked Damian. She was the only one who remembered his daughter's birthday. "Thank you, Thomas. Keep the engine warm. I have a feeling tonight might end abruptly," Damian replied, smoothing the skirt of her cream-colored silk gown. It was a vintage Dior, understated and priceless, but to the untrained eye it was just a plain dress. Tonight was William Harrington's 70th birthday jubilee. It was the social event of the season. Senators, tech moguls, and the remnants of America's aristocracy were inside. And so was Preston. Preston had arrived 2 hours earlier. He claimed he had urgent business to prepare for the party. Damian knew exactly what that business was. Her name was Sasha Miller. Sasha was Preston's 24-year-old executive assistant. She was everything Damian was not: loud, vibrant, desperate for attention, and draped in logos. For the past 6 months, Preston hadn't even been subtle. Credit card statements for Cartier bracelets, business trips to Cabo, where he forgot to turn off his Instagram location, tagging it was a humiliating. Damian walked up the limestone steps, the heavy oak doors groaning open before she even touched them. The grand foyer was already buzzing. A string quartet played Mozart in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the roar of conversation and the clinking of champagne flutes. The moment Damian stepped onto the marble floor, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle, a dip in volume, a few side eyes. They all knew. In these circles, affairs were common, but bringing the mistress to the family patriarch's milestone birthday, that was a declaration of war. And there they were, standing near the massive fireplace under the portrait of Preston's great-grandfather, was her husband. He looked dashing in his tuxedo holding court. Hanging off his arm, wearing a dress that was too red, too tight, and far too low cut for a family gathering, was Sasha. Sasha threw her head back, laughing at something Preston said, her hand resting possessively on his chest. She spotted Damian across the room. The laughter didn't stop. It just changed pitch, becoming sharper, more performative. Sasha nudged Preston and pointed with her chin. Preston turned. His face didn't show guilt. It showed annoyance. He hated confrontation, and he hated that Damian had actually shown up. He whispered something to Sasha, adjusted his cufflinks, and waited for Damian to approach them. Damian took a breath, locked her emotions in a steel box in her mind, and began the long walk across the room. "You made it," Preston said, as Damian stopped 3 feet away from them. No kiss on the cheek. No, you look lovely. Just a statement of fact, delivered with the enthusiasm of a man receiving a tax audit. "It's your father's 70th, Preston. My absence would be more conspicuous than my presence," Damian said, her voice calm. She turned her gaze to the woman clinging to her husband's bicep like a barnacle. "Hello, Sasha. I wasn't aware assistants were on the guest list for private family jubilees." Sasha smirked, tightening her grip on Preston. "Oh, Damian. Hi, Preston just begged me to come. We've been working so hard on the merger deal he said he couldn't survive the night without his right-hand woman. Besides," she looked Damian up and down, "someone needed to bring a little life to this place. It's so dusty." "It's historic," Damian corrected. "There's a difference." "Right, sure," Sasha giggled, taking a sip of her champagne. "But history is just a nice word for old, isn't it? Preston and I were just talking about how this main hall needs a revamp. Something modern. Maybe marble floors that aren't so cracked, brighter lights. It feels like a mausoleum in here." Damian looked at the floors. They were imported Italian marble from the 1890s, hand-laid. "I believe William likes the house, as it is." "Oh, please," Sasha waved her hand dismissively, the diamond bracelet on her wrist, catching the light a bracelet Damian recognized from a charge on their joint account last month. "William is tired. Preston says the old man is ready to hand over the keys any day now, and when Preston takes over, well, out with the old, in with the new. Right, babe?" Preston shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Sasha, let's not get ahead of ourselves." But he didn't correct her. He didn't tell her to stop disrespecting his wife or his father's home. He just took a large gulp of his scotch. "I'm going to find William," Damian said, her stomach churning. "Excuse me." As she turned to leave, Sasha took a step forward, seemingly to steady herself on her 6-inch heels, but her foot hooked neatly behind the train of Damian's dress. Damian stumbled, catching herself on a waiter's tray, just in time to avoid face-planting into the hors d'oeuvres. The tray wobbled. A glass of Pinot Noir teetered on the edge. "Whoops!" Sasha squealed, reaching out, but effectively knocking the glass over. The red wine splashed across the back of Damian's cream silk gown. It looked like a gunshot wound blooming across the fabric. The room went dead silent. "Oh my God!" Sasha gasped, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Her eyes were dancing with malice. "Damian, I am so clumsy. I was just trying to help you. You really should watch where you're walking, though. You're always so heavy-footed." Preston looked at the stain, then at Damian's face. "For God's sake, Damian," he hissed under his breath. "Go clean yourself up. You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Damian asked, her voice trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from a rage so pure it felt like white heat. "Just go," Preston snapped, turning his back to her to comfort Sasha, who was fake pouting. "It's fine, Sasha. It's just an old dress. She has plenty of old things." Damian stood there for a heartbeat. She felt the wet, cold wine soaking through to her skin. She looked around the room. Her mother-in-law Margaret was by the buffet, studiously examining a lobster tail to avoid eye contact. The cousins were whispering behind their hands. Then she saw him. William Harrington, the patriarch, was standing on the second-floor balcony, looking down at the foyer. He wasn't looking at Preston. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was looking directly at Damian. He didn't smile, but he gave a barely perceptible nod. "Hold the line," that nod said. Damian straightened her spine. She didn't run to the bathroom. She didn't flee the party. She grabbed a napkin from a passing waiter, dabbed the excess liquid, and turned back to Sasha. "You're right, Sasha," Damian said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "It is an old dress. It's vintage. It survives things, unlike cheap trends that fall apart after one season." She walked past them, head high, heading straight for the head table. The game had changed. Dinner was served in the great hall, a long mahogany table set for 30 of the family's closest circle, stretched under the crystal chandeliers. By protocol, Damian, as the wife of the eldest son, should be seated to William's right. Preston should be on his left. However, when the doors opened and the guests filed in, Sasha made her move. She practically sprinted to the head of the table, placing her rhinestone-encrusted clutch on the seat to William's right. "I'll sit here," she announced loudly. "I want to hear all of William's war stories. Preston says you're a legend, Bill." Bill. No one called William Harrington Bill. Not even the President of the United States. William, who was just approaching the table with his cane, stopped. He looked at the clutch purse on the chair, then up at Sasha. His face was a mask of granite. "That seat is reserved for family, Ms. Miller," William rumbled. His voice was gravel and authority. "Oh, but I practically am." Sasha laughed, grabbing Preston's hand and pulling him toward the chair next to her. "Preston and I are inseparable. Besides, Damian won't mind sitting further down, will you?" "You look a mess anyway with that stain. Better to be out of the photos." Everyone looked at Preston. This was the moment. The moment a husband defends his wife. The moment a son respects his father's house. Preston looked at Sasha's pleading, manipulative eyes, then at his father's stern glare. He swallowed hard. "Dad, just let her sit there. It's not a big deal. Damian can sit at the end near the kids. She's better with them anyway." A collective gasp went through the room. Margaret Preston's mother dropped her fork. Damian didn't move toward the kids' table. She walked to the empty chair directly opposite William, the foot of the table, traditionally the seat of the hostess, or the challenger. "Fine," William said, his eyes narrowing. "Sit, Ms. Miller. Let us see if you have the stomach for it." The dinner began with tension, so thick it could be cut with the silver knives. Sasha, emboldened by her victory, drank wine rapidly and spoke even faster. She critiqued the soup. "A little salty, don't you think?" interrupted the guests, and kept pawing at Preston. By the main course, rack of lamb with mint jelly, Sasha decided to pivot to her favorite topic, real estate. "So, Bill?" Sasha said, chewing with her mouth slightly open. "Preston tells me the upkeep on this place is a nightmare. Heating bills through the roof, plumbing issues. Honestly, you should sell. There's a developer from New York looking for land to build luxury condos. You could get a fortune." William slowly cut a piece of lamb. "This house has been in the Harrington name for 4 generations. We do not sell." "Everything has a price," Sasha countered, winking at Preston. "Right, baby Preston says the trust fund is a little tied up. Liquidating this asset would solve all your cash flow problems. We could get a penthouse in the city and a summer place in the Hamptons. Something modern. Glass walls. No drafts." Damian spoke up for the first time since sitting down. "The Eyrie is a historical landmark, Sasha. It cannot be demolished for condos." Sasha rolled her eyes. "There she goes again. The librarian speaks. Look, Damian, no offense, but you don't understand business. You marry into money, you don't make it. Preston and I are talking about assets, about the future." Sasha turned back to William, ignoring Damian completely. Preston says you're practically broke, Bill. House rich, cash poor. That's why he's been working so hard to secure new investors. Honestly, you should be thanking him. And me. I've given him the confidence to finally make the hard decisions. She swirled her wine glass. In fact, we were thinking, once Preston takes over the estate legally next month, that is the plan, right? We're going to evict the tenants in the guest house to turn it into a yoga studio for me. The table went deadly quiet. The tenants in the guest house were William's elderly sister and her husband. William placed his knife and fork down. The sound clattered against the china, echoing in the silence. "Preston," William said, his voice dangerously low. "Is this true? You plan to evict Aunt Martha?" Preston turned pale. "Dad, Sasha is just brainstorming. Nothing is decided. But financially, the estate is bleeding. We have to be realistic. We might need to make changes when the title transfers." "When the title transfers," William repeated. He looked at his son with profound disappointment. Then he looked down the long table at Damian. Damian was sipping her water. Her eyes met William's. She gave him a small, sad smile and nodded. William stood up. "It seems," William announced, his voice booming, now projecting to the corners of the room, "that there is a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this evening, and more importantly, a misunderstanding about whose house you are currently eating in." Sasha giggled nervously. "Oh, sit down, Bill. Don't be dramatic. We know it's your house for now." "No," William said. "It isn't." The silence that fell over the great hall was heavier than the limestone blocks the house was built from. Sasha's fork hovered halfway to her mouth. Preston looked at his father as if the older man had suddenly started speaking Aramaic. "What are you talking about, Dad?" Preston laughed, a brittle cracking sound. "Of course it's your house. It's the Harrington estate. It's been ours for 100 years." William remained standing. He signaled to a man sitting quietly near the end of the table, Mr. Henderson, the family attorney for 40 years. Henderson stood up, wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, and reached into a leather briefcase he had placed beside his chair. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. Sasha was partially correct about one thing. William said, his voice steady and cold. 5 years ago, the estate was indeed in dire financial straits. We were house rich and cash poor. And why was that, Preston? Preston tugged at his collar. "The market shifted, Dad. You know that. The tech sector investments," William corrected, "were a gamble you took with the estate's operating capital against my express wishes. You lost nearly $4 million in 6 months trying to play venture capitalist with money that wasn't yours to lose. We were facing foreclosure on the Eyrie. The bank was days away from seizing the assets." A murmur went through the guests. This was dirty laundry that had never been aired. Preston turned beet red. "Dad, this isn't the time." "It is absolutely the time," William boomed. "Because everyone in this room needs to understand why my son is not holding the keys to the kingdom. When the bank came calling, I didn't call you, Preston. You were too busy hiding your mistakes in the Bahamas. I called the only person in this family who understands fiscal responsibility, the only person who has actually built wealth instead of just inheriting it." William turned and extended a hand toward the foot of the table. "I called my daughter-in-law." All eyes swung to Damian. She hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in her wine-stained gown, her expression unreadable. Sasha let out a screechy laugh. "Damian, what could she possibly do? She used coupons to buy groceries last week." "That," William said, "is called frugality, Miss Miller, a concept foreign to you. Damian, would you like to explain, or shall Mr. Henderson?" Damian placed her hands flat on the table. "I can explain, William. Her voice was calm, clear, and entirely different from the meek tone she usually used around Preston. 5 years ago, when Preston crashed the family accounts, Damian began looking directly at her husband. I didn't rely on Harrington money to fix it. I used my own. Before I married you, Preston, I worked in high-frequency trading in Chicago. I lived off 20% of my income and invested 80%. When we married, I kept my assets separate because your prenuptial agreement insisted on it. You wanted to protect your money from the scholarship girl. A few chuckles rippled through the room from the business titans present. They appreciated the irony. My portfolio, Damian continued, has performed exceptionally well. When William told me the estate was about to be seized, I bought the debt. All of it. I paid off the bank, liquidated the outstanding loans, and funded the trust for the next decade. Mr. Henderson walked to the center of the room and placed a single ornate document on the table in front of William. This, William said, placing his hand on the document, is the deed to the Eyrie, and the name on the title isn't William Harrington, and it certainly isn't Preston Harrington IV. Henderson opened the document. The sole owner of the property known as the Eyrie, including all ground structures and contents, is Damian Vance Harrington. William looked at Sasha, whose face had gone slack with shock. My daughter-in-law didn't just save this house, she owns it. I have been living here for the past 5 years as her tenant. And you, Miss Miller, are currently sitting in her chair, drinking her wine, and insulting her hospitality. For 10 seconds, no one breathed. The reality of the situation crashed down on the room like a tidal wave. The poor relation, wife, the one everyone pitied or ignored, held the literal deed to their social standing. Preston was the first to break. He leaped out of his chair, knocking it backward. "You're lying," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Henderson. "This is some kind of sick joke for Dad's birthday. Damian doesn't have that kind of money. She begs me for an allowance." "I ask for the household budget, Preston," Damian corrected quietly, "which you frequently squander on business trips that involve bottle service in Miami. I haven't touched my own capital for our daily expenses since the day you cheated on me the first time, 3 years ago." Preston paled. He thought she didn't know about the first one. Sasha stood up now, her face contorted in ugly fury. The facade of the bubbly, helpful assistant evaporated instantly. "This is bullshit!" she screamed, slamming her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You can't own this. Preston is the heir. He promised me. He said when the old man kicked the bucket we'd run this town, we were going to turn this dump into something real. And there it is," William said, dryly resuming his seat. "The true nature of the arrangement." Sasha spun on Preston, grabbing the lapels of his tuxedo. "Fix this. You told me he was broke. You told me she was nobody. You said you were just waiting for the right time to dump her and get the inheritance." Preston looked trapped. He looked at his enraged mistress, his disappointed father, and his stone-cold wife. "Damian." Preston pleaded, changing tactics instantly to whining. "Baby, come on. You know Sasha is just high-spirited. You can't seriously mean you own the house. Dad just put it in your name for tax purposes, right? To protect it from the creditors, it's still ours." Damian stood up slowly. She walked the length of the table towards them. The sea of guests parted for her. With every step, she seemed to grow taller. "It was never yours, Preston," Damian said, stopping inches from him. "You felt entitled to it because of your last name. You felt entitled to my silence, my patience, and my loyalty, while you paraded this child around town on my dime." "Your dime!" Sasha spat. "It's Preston's money." "No," Damian said, turning her gaze to Sasha. It was a look so withering that Sasha actually took a step back. Preston's salary barely covers the lease on his Porsche and the minimum payments on the credit cards you maxed out. The dinners, the flights, the Cartier bracelet on your wrist that was paid from the joint checking account, which I funded last month because Preston overdrew his personal account. Damian reached out and took the champagne flute from Sasha's hand. And this crystal, Damian said, examining the glass, is Waterford from the 1920s collection. It belongs to me, and I'd prefer if you didn't break it. She set the glass down firmly on the table. Preston lied to you, Sasha. He's not rich. He's allowance dependent, and his allowance just ran out. Sasha looked at Preston, horrified clarity dawning on her face. You're broke, Preston stammered. Sasha, honey, it's complicated. Assets are illiquid. You loser, Sasha shrieked. She shoved him hard in the chest. I wasted 6 months on you. I could have been with that hedge fund guy from Greenwich. She grabbed her rhinestone clutch and turned to storm out, but Damian's voice stopped her cold. Wait. Sasha stopped. The heels of her Louboutins dug into the antique Persian rug as she spun around. Her face was a mask of smeared contour and unbridled fury. She wasn't used to losing. In her world, a world of Instagram filters, leased luxury cars and transactional relationships, she had always managed to charm or bully her way out of a corner. "Excuse me!" Sasha spat, her voice shrill enough to crack the tension in the room. "You want me to pay you? You're delusional. Preston, tell your wife to back off before I sue her for harassment." Preston, who was currently trying to make himself as small as physically possible in his chair, looked between the two women. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was watching his life incinerate in real time. "I am not asking for a favor, Ms. Miller," Damian said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously smooth. "And I am certainly not asking for an apology. I am informing you of a debt." Damian gestured to Mr. Henderson. The elderly lawyer who had looked like a sleepy grandfather just moments ago now looked like a shark smelling blood. He tapped the screen of his tablet, projecting a hologram of confidence that terrified everyone in the room. "Mr. Harrington's corporate credit card," Henderson began, his dry voice cutting through the silence. "The one issued by Harrington Holdings, a company solely owned by Damian Vance Harrington, has seen significant activity in the last fiscal quarter. Activity that upon audit does not appear to be business-related. So what?" Sasha crossed her arms, the diamonds on her wrist flashing. "Preston took me on business trips. We had meetings. You can't prove anything." "Let us review the itinerary of these meetings," Damian said, taking the tablet from Henderson. She began to scroll her eyes, scanning the data with the precision of the high-frequency trader she used to be. "May 14th, Damian read aloud. 4 nights at the one and only Palmilla in Los Cabos. The presidential suite. Total cost $12,000. Preston, did you close a deal in Cabo, or did you just close the blinds?" A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the guests. Preston turned a shade of purple that clashed violently with the curtains. "May 16th. Damian continued, her voice relentless. "A charge of $3,000 at a boutique called Siren. I looked it up. They sell high-end swimwear and lingerie. Unless the estate is pivoting into the underwear market, I fail to see how this is a deductible expense." Sasha shifted her weight, looking for an exit, but the waiters had subtly moved to block the main doors. She was trapped in the arena. "And finally," Damian said, looking up from the screen, "August 2nd. A charge of $8,500 at Cartier. Item description: love bracelet, yellow gold, diamond paved." The room went deadly silent. All eyes dropped to Sasha's left wrist. "That," Damian said, pointing a manicured finger at the jewelry, was purchased with funds from the joint account, specifically the overdraft protection, which draws directly from my personal trust. You are wearing my money, Sasha." "It was a gift," Sasha shrieked, clutching her wrist. "He gave it to me." "You can't take a gift back." "He gave you stolen property," Mr. Henderson interjected calmly. "Under Rhode Island law, if the funds used to purchase an item were misappropriated, the item itself is considered proceeds of theft. We can either have the police, who are currently stationed at the gate for security, come in and file a report for grand larceny, or—" He let the sentence hang. Sasha looked at Preston. "Do something. Tell them it was your money." Preston looked at the floor, his voice a pathetic whisper. It wasn't my money, Sasha. I told you. The trust is complicated." "You lied to me." Sasha screamed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You told me you were the CEO. You told me she was a charity case. He is the CEO." William spoke up from the head of the table, slicing a pear with surgical precision. "Of a shell company we created to keep him occupied." This was the second bomb of the night. Preston's head snapped up. "What?" William sighed, looking at his son with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. "The investment firm you go to every day, Preston, the one on the 4th floor, Damian and I set that up 5 years ago. We fed it small, low-risk portfolios just to give you something to do, so you wouldn't interfere with the actual business. You haven't made a real financial decision for this family since 2018. The humiliation was total. Preston wasn't just broke. He was a child playing with a toy steering wheel while his wife drove the car. Sasha stared at Preston with pure, unadulterated disgust. The illusion of power, the promise of the mansion, the status, it was all smoke. She was standing next to a man who was essentially an unemployed intern. "You are pathetic," Sasha hissed at him. "The bracelet, Ms. Miller." Damian commanded, holding out her hand. "Now." Sasha looked at the guests. She saw the senators, the heiresses, the captains of industry. They weren't looking at her with desire or envy anymore. They were looking at her like she was a stain on the carpet. With a cry of frustrated rage, Sasha fumbled with the clasp. She tore the bracelet off her wrist, scratching her skin in the process, and hurled it. It didn't slide to Damian this time. It hit the marble floor with a heavy clink and spun to a stop near the centerpiece. "Take it!" Sasha yelled, tears of rage finally spilling over. "I hope you choke on it. You're all sick. You let him play, pretend for years. You're absolute psychopaths." "We're protecting our assets," Damian said, coolly signaling a waiter to retrieve the jewelry. "Something you clearly know nothing about. Mr. Henderson has the civil suit ready. You'll be served Monday for the remaining balance of $36,000. I suggest you start saving. I hear the job market is tough for assistants, with no references." Sasha grabbed her rhinestone clutch, her chest heaving. She looked like she wanted to lunge across the table, but the sheer weight of Damian's authority pinned her in place. "I'm leaving," Sasha announced, though nobody had asked her to stay. "And don't you dare follow me, Preston. If I see your face again, I'll vomit." She turned and sprinted for the doors, her heels clacking violently against the stone. The heavy oak doors groaned open, and then slammed shut with a finality that shook the window panes. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the soft clinking of silverware, as a few brave guests resumed eating. Damian didn't sit down. She turned slowly to her husband. Preston was sweating profusely. His tuxedo shirt was clinging to his chest. The safety net of his inheritance, the arrogance of his affair, the ego boost of his mistress. It was all gone. He was stripped bare in front of the people he tried so hard to impress. "Elle," he started, his voice trembling, reaching for a napkin to dab his forehead. "Baby, listen. We can talk about this." Sasha, she manipulated me. She preyed on me. You saw how crazy she was. She just wanted the money. I was a victim here." Damian tilted her head, observing him like a scientist observing a particularly disappointing lab rat. "A victim, you booked the flights, Preston. You signed the receipts. You invited her into my home on your father's birthday." I was confused. The pressure of the business... Preston stammered, falling back on his old excuses. "There is no business." William slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal jump. "Did you not hear me, boy? You have been managing a phantom office. We gave you a title so you wouldn't bankrupt us again. You have no pressure. You have a sandbox." Preston recoiled as if slapped. The realization was sinking in deep. "So, everything I did, the reports, the meetings, read by no one," Damian said. "Filed in a drawer. We just wanted you to feel important, Preston. Because when you feel important, you spend less money. Or so we thought." She walked around the table until she was standing directly behind him. She placed her hands on the back of his chair. He flinched. "I am done protecting your dignity, Preston," Damian said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "Because you have none left to protect." She walked back to her seat, the seat at the foot of the table, the seat of power, and turned to face him fully. "You have two choices tonight, Preston, and I suggest you listen very carefully, because I will not repeat them." Preston looked up, his eyes rimmed with red. He looked like a frightened child. "Choice one," Damian said, holding up a single finger. "You leave right now. You walk out that door after your mistress. You take nothing but the tuxedo on your back. No car, the Porsche belongs to the company. No credit cards, I cancelled them 10 minutes ago via the app. No cash. You walk into the night, and you see if Sasha creates a space for you in her world now that you're destitute. You fight me for a divorce settlement, and I will drag this out in court for 5 years, until you are buried in legal fees you can't afford." Preston swallowed hard. He imagined the cold wind outside. He imagined Sasha's face when he showed up empty-handed. He knew with sinking dread that she wouldn't even open the door. "And choice two?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Choice two," Damian said, holding up a second finger. "You stay. But not as my husband. That part of our life is over. You stay as a guest of the Harrington estate. You will sleep in the guest quarters above the garage, the ones with the single-pane windows and the radiator that clanks, the ones Sasha wanted to turn into a yoga studio." She paused, letting the geography of his demotion sink in. "Tomorrow morning," she continued, "we begin divorce proceedings on my terms. You will accept the settlement I offer, which will be based strictly on the prenuptial agreement. You will keep your mouth shut. You will not embarrass this family again. If you agree to this, I will ensure you have a modest stipend and a roof over your head. You won't starve, but you will never ever sit at the head of this table again." The room waited. The senators, the bankers, the cousins, they all watched. Preston Harrington IV, the golden boy who had never worked a day in his life. He looked at the door. Freedom, but poverty. He looked at Damian. Humiliation, but safety. Preston was not a brave man. He was a man of comfort. He was a man who needed someone to pay the heating bill. He slumped in his chair, his posture collapsing completely. He couldn't even look Damian in the eye. "I'll take the guest wing," he mumbled to his lap. A collective exhale went through the room. It was pathetic, and it was done. "Wise choice," Damian said, her face betraying no emotion. She didn't smile. There was no joy in this victory, only the cold satisfaction of order being restored. She turned to Thomas, who was standing by the sideboard. "Thomas, please collect Mr. Harrington's keys. He won't be needing the Porsche anymore. And have his things moved to the garage apartment. Just the essentials. He can retrieve the rest later." Preston stood up slowly. He felt the eyes of everyone on him. He felt the phantom weight of the crown he thought he wore slipping off his head and shattering on the floor. He didn't say goodbye to his father. He didn't look at his mother. He simply turned and walked toward the side exit, the one used by the staff. When the door clicked shut behind him, the tension in the room finally broke. Damian stood there for a moment, smoothing the skirt of her wine-stained vintage dress. She looked at the empty chair where her husband had sat, and then at the empty chair where his mistress had sat. She looked up at William. The old man raised his glass to her. It was a salute. Damian picked up her own glass, the one Sasha had tried to claim was dusty. She looked at the guests who were watching her with a newfound, terrifying respect. She wasn't just the wife anymore. She was the landlord. She was the bank. She was the Harrington estate. "I apologize for the disruption to the evening," Damian said, her voice clear and gracious, slipping back into the role of the perfect hostess, though now with steel plating underneath. "It seems we have trimmed some fat from the guest list. Please everyone resume eating. The lamb is excellent. And waiter," she held out her glass, "pour me a fresh glass of wine, a full one. I believe I have earned it." The morning sun over Newport didn't care about the devastation it illuminated. It rose with a piercing, cheerful brightness that felt mocking to Preston Harrington IV as he woke up on a lumpy mattress in the guest wing. The guest wing was a generous term for what was essentially the servants' quarters from the 1920s, located above the detached garage. It smelled faintly of gasoline and old cedar. There was no thread-count Egyptian cotton here, no heated floors, and certainly no bell to ring for coffee. Preston sat up, his head pounding from the scotch he'd consumed after the party. For a fleeting second, he thought it was a nightmare, a bizarre anxiety dream brought on by guilt. But then he saw his tuxedo crumpled in the corner, the only clothes he had. He checked his phone. No new messages from Sasha. In fact, she had blocked him on everything. He walked across the gravel driveway toward the main house, shivering in his dress shirt. The wind coming off the ocean was biting. He tried the kitchen door locked. He walked around to the front. The massive oak doors were shut tight. He had to ring the doorbell of the house he had lived in since birth. After a humiliating 3 minutes, Thomas the driver opened the door. He didn't bow. He didn't smile. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington." Thomas said, his tone perfectly neutral. "Mrs. Harrington is in the solarium. She is expecting you." Preston pushed past him, marching toward the back of the house. He needed to fix this. He could always fix things. A little charm, a little begging, maybe a promise to go to therapy. Damian was soft. She always folded. He burst into the solarium. Damian was sitting at the round glass table, bathed in sunlight, reading the Wall Street Journal. She looked immaculate in a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. William was opposite her, buttering a piece of toast. "Elle, listen." Preston started, breathless. "We need to talk. Last night was insanity. I don't know what came over me, but we can't just throw away 7 years because of one bad scene." Damian didn't look up from her paper. She turned a page, the crisp sound echoing in the glass room. "Thomas," she said, addressing the driver who had followed Preston in. "Please bring Mr. Harrington a coffee. To go." Preston froze. "To go, Damian. I live here." Finally, she looked at him. Her eyes were dark, clear, and devoid of the anxious affection he was used to. "No, Preston. You reside here temporarily at my discretion. And right now you have a meeting with Mr. Henderson in the library. I suggest you don't keep him waiting. He charges by the hour, and I'm deducting it from your severance." "Severance?" Preston sputtered. "I'm your husband, not a fired employee." "Functionally, you were both," William interjected without looking up from his toast. "And you were incompetent at both jobs." The legal slaughter. The meeting in the library was less of a negotiation and more of an autopsy of Preston's life. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had bounced Preston on his knee as a toddler, now sat behind a stack of files thick enough to stop a bullet. "The situation is straightforward, Preston," Henderson said, adjusting his spectacles. "The prenuptial agreement you insisted on to protect your future inheritance is ironclad. It states that in the event of infidelity, the offending party forfeits all claims to spousal support. We have photos, credit card statements, and roughly 300 text messages between you and Ms. Miller confirming the affair." Preston slumped in the leather chair. "Okay, fine. No alimony. But the trust fund, the dividend payouts—" "The trust fund is discretionary," Henderson corrected. "Controlled by the trustee. That was your father. It is now Damian." Preston's eyes bulged. "You gave her control of the trust." "I gave control to the person who put the money into the trust," William said from the doorway, leaning on his cane. "You drained it, son. Damian refilled it. It's her money. You are essentially asking for an allowance from your ex-wife." Damian walked into the room carrying a single file folder. She placed it in front of Preston. "I am not heartless, Preston," she said softly. "Despite what you did. Despite the humiliation of bringing that woman into my home. I have arranged a settlement." Preston opened the folder. He scanned the document. His face went from pale to red. "A stipend $3,000 a month. Damian, I can't live on this. My car lease is $200. The Porsche is company property," Damian noted. "It's already been repossessed. Thomas took the keys last night. You have a sedate, reliable Honda Civic waiting for you in the driveway. It's fully paid off. Consider it a parting gift." "And the job?" Preston pointed at a paragraph. "What is this junior analyst at scorched earth salary levels?" Damian explained. "It's at a firm in Providence. The owner owes me a favor. It's a real job, Preston. You have to show up at 8 a.m. You have to enter data. If you don't work, you get fired. If you get fired, the stipend stops." Preston stared at her. "You're trying to humiliate me." "I'm trying to make a man out of you," Damian said, her voice hard as flint. "Something your father and I failed to do, because we were too busy shielding you from consequences. The shield is gone. Sink or swim." Preston looked at the pen. He looked at his father, who turned his back. He looked at Damian, who watched him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. With a shaking hand, he signed the papers. The fall of the Mistress. While Preston was learning the harsh reality of forensic accounting, Sasha Miller was discovering that social gravity in Newport only works in one direction down. She had fled the party in a rage, convinced she could spin the narrative. She was young, she was hot, and she had 50,000 Instagram followers. She posted a tearful video from her hotel room that night, claiming she was bullied by a jealous old money hags, and that Preston was being held hostage by his abusive family. She expected sympathy. She expected viral support. What she got was the Rhode Island legal system. 2 days after the party, Sasha was attempting to check out of the Viking Hotel when her card was declined. "That's impossible," she snapped at the clerk. "Run it again. It's a black card." "It's declined, miss," the clerk said, enjoying this slightly too much. "And the manager would like a word." As she turned, 2 uniformed officers stepped forward. Behind them was a process server. "Sasha Miller?" the server asked. "Yes." He slapped a thick envelope into her chest. "You are being sued by the Harrington estate for theft, fraud, and misappropriation of corporate funds. You are also named in a civil suit regarding the defamation of Mrs. Damian Harrington." Sasha laughed nervously. "Theft, I didn't steal anything." "The jewelry, the flights, the hotel rooms," the officer said. "They were purchased with a corporate card, unauthorized for personal use. The total is just over $45,000. Unless you can pay that back right now, we have a warrant to seize any assets purchased with those funds as evidence." The scene in the hotel lobby was brutal. They took the Louis Vuitton luggage. They took the Cartier bracelet she had picked up from the floor, which she had tried to sneak back into her purse. They even took her laptop. Sasha called Preston, straight to voicemail. She called the hedge fund guy from Greenwich. He didn't answer. Word travels fast in these circles, and nobody wants a liability. Broke humiliated, and facing a potential felony charge if she didn't settle, Sasha made a deal. She agreed to a public retraction of her social media posts, a repayment plan that would garnish her wages for the next 10 years, and a restraining order banning her from coming within 5 miles of the Harrington estate. She moved back to Ohio 3 days later. The last anyone heard, she was selling herbal supplements on Facebook and dating a manager at a car dealership. The winter of reckoning. The divorce was finalized in January. It was quiet. No press, no drama, just a signature on a dotted line. Preston moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Providence. It was beige, the carpet was synthetic, the radiator clanked at night. His new life was a shock to the system. He had to do his own laundry. He had to grocery shop. For the first month, he called Damian 3 times, begging for an advance on his stipend. "I'm sorry, Preston," she would say, her voice cool and distant. "It's not in the budget." Click. He saw her once from a distance about 2 months later. He was leaving his office building wearing a suit that was starting to look a bit worn because he couldn't afford the dry cleaner as often as he liked. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. Thomas got out and opened the rear door. Damian stepped out. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't wearing the muted colors she used to wear to blend into the background. She wore a sharp emerald green coat and high leather boots. She was laughing at something the man next to her said. The man was Julian Vance, a high-powered architect from New York. Preston knew him by reputation. The guy was brilliant, wealthy, and intimidating. He watched as Julian placed a hand on the small of Damian's back, a gesture of respect and affection that Preston had never bothered to show her. They walked into a high-end restaurant, the kind Preston used to get the best table at, without a reservation. Now he was just a guy on the sidewalk with a ham sandwich in his briefcase. He realized then, with a crushing weight in his chest, that Damian hadn't just taken his house. She had taken his potential. She was living the life he was supposed to have led, but she was doing it with the grace and competence he never possessed. Spring at the Eyrie. 6 months after the infamous birthday party, the scaffolding came down from the front of the Eyrie. The renovations were complete. The cracked marble in the foyer had been replaced with a stunning, seamless slab of white Italian stone. The gloomy lighting was gone, replaced by a modern airy chandelier that caught the sunlight and threw rainbows across the walls. It was William's 71st birthday, but this time there was no grand gala, no pretenses. They had a small dinner on the terrace overlooking the ocean. Just Damian, William, Aunt Martha, who was happily still living in the guest house, now renovated, with a new kitchenette and a few close friends. William raised his glass. His hand was steady. He looked younger than he had in years. The burden of the failing estate had been lifted from his shoulders, and he found he enjoyed the role of advisor much more than king. To Damian, William said, his voice thick with emotion. "The lady of the house. You saved us, Elle. In every way, a family can be saved." Damian smiled, clinking her glass against his. "We saved it together, William." Later that evening, after the guests had left, Damian walked through the silent house. She ran her hand along the mahogany banister. For years she had felt like a visitor here, an imposter. She had walked on tiptoes, afraid to disturb the ghosts of Harrington's past. She had let Preston and his mother make her feel small, grateful for the crumbs of their prestige. She stopped in front of the grand mirror in the hallway, the same spot where Sasha had spilled the wine. She looked at her reflection. She saw the fine lines around her eyes, earned through stress and survival. She saw the set of her jaw firm and resolute. She thought about the Dior dress. She had kept it, but she hadn't worn it since that night. It felt like a costume from a past life. She walked into the library and sat behind the massive oak desk. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed with the quarterly projections. The estate's investments were up 12%. The tenant properties were fully leased. The charitable foundation she had started in William's name was fully funded. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Preston. "Happy birthday to Dad. Hope it was nice. I got a promotion to senior analyst. Does that mean we can discuss the stipend?" Damian stared at the message. She felt a flicker of pity, but it was distant, like looking at an old photograph of a stranger. She typed back, "Congratulations on the promotion, Preston. That is excellent news. Since your income has increased, we can discuss reducing the stipend at the next quarterly review. Best, Damian." She set the phone down, took a sip of her tea, and turned her chair to face the ocean. The moon was painting a silver path across the black water. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It was full of peace. It was full of a future she had built with her own 2 hands. Damian Vance Harrington took a deep breath of the salt air. She wasn't the mistress of the house anymore. She was the master. And that, my friends, is how you handle a cheater, a gold digger, and a crumbling dynasty without ever raising your voice. Damian didn't just win. She rewrote the entire game. It's a powerful reminder that while some people are born with a silver spoon, others are busy forging the steel to cut them off. I have to ask, what do you think about Damian's final text to Preston? Was cutting his stipend after his promotion too harsh, or was it the perfect lesson in independence? Personally, I think it was the chef's kiss of karma. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories and reactions. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Newport drama, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. Until then, stay sharp and check your deeds. Thanks for watching.